Thank you for your participations today. And then I would like to say good afternoon, our respected colleagues. And then we are happy and then we are very honored now to have Professor Jessica Sukandosi with us. So here, Professor Sukandosi will give us a presentation, an update, 2022 update on the mechanism of liver carcinogenesis in our yellow webinar. And then again, we would like to thank you, Professor Sukandosi, to accept our invitations. And then I feel really honored that I'm able to introduce you for our participants today. Actually, you don't need introduction, but let's do it. So Professor Sukandosi is a professor of oncology in the University of Paris, and now she is the director of the, correct me if I'm wrong, I apologize for my French, Cordelier Research Center, and also the director of the INSEM Unit Functional Genomic of Solid Tumor in Paris. So we all know that she is one, or if not the most leading scientist in the field of genomics and genetics of liver cancer. One of the most important contributions that several years back, she and her team found the third promoter mutations activating telomerase as the most important mechanisms of malignant transformations in both adenoma and cirrhotic nodules in carcinoma. And then her group also found several novel oncogenes and heterogeneous factors predisposing to liver tumor development that might be important in the development of new therapies. And also her group, they the first time who pioneered and defined the molecular classifications of liver cancers. Her scientific productivity is amazing. I checked today that your Hertz index is 93, with the citations index for more than 47,000. So amazing. Professor Sukandosi also coordinated several consortia for liver cancer research, in particular within the project of the International Cancer Genome Consortium and the heterogeneity of tumor environment. And also she's an expert in funding, both in national and international institutions such as European Research Council, Cancer Research UK, and several organizations, funding bodies in America, in Asia, and so on. For her achievement, Professor Sukandosi has received multiple awards. The list is very long, including the Knight of Legion of Honor and the Coupe Delaune Prize for French research by the Foundation of Schiller-Becancourt, Dr. Honoris Causa by the Catholic University of Leuven, Ismar Bois Medal, INSEM Prize, and Electa Fellow of the European Academy of Cancer Science. Now, currently, Professor Sukandosi is the president of International Liver Cancer Associations and also member of Hepatobiliary Neoplasia of the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease, and she acted also previously co-editor of the Journal of Hepatology. So I don't want to take more of your time, professors. Now the time is yours. If you can just share your slides. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your very kind invitation, and it's really a pleasure to share the work we perform. So today we speak on the understanding of the mechanism of liver carcinogenesis, where we are in 2022. I realize that I am not going to speak on adenoma, but I will try to cover what is currently our view of the mechanism of carcinogenesis in human. So, as you know, in the liver, we are a disease. Cancer liver, the cancer developed in liver is really a disease of the genome that is due to the accumulation of mutations and AP mutations. So alteration of the genome, AP alteration or mutations, all over during life. And each hepatocyte in the liver, in our liver, are accumulating this mutation progressively during life, as all the cells in our body, whatever the organ. And this process starts, in fact, very early, before life, in fact, during pregnancy. And then we can have an acceleration of this accumulation of mutations due to several things. First, we can have a genetic predisposition, so a predisposition that aim to accumulate more mutation during life and to develop cancer. We can have some, usually during life, an increase exposure to environmental factors that can be toxic for the DNA and improve the number of mutations that we can accumulate. During life also, the immunosurveillance is not on the top, and particularly in old patients, we have a lower immunosurveillance. And if we decrease our immunosurveillance in the body, we will favor the event of malignancy. We have several cells in the liver that can be targeted by the mutations. Today we will speak only on the hepatocellular cells. That means the malignant transformation of hepatocytes or progenitor of hepatocytes. We are not going to speak on cholangiocarcinoma also. And this mutation can occur at different age during life. What we know usually for all cancer is that very early in children, we pinpoint, and the mutation can pinpoint some cells that are immature, and some of them can be more prompt to develop and transform in malignant tumor. Whereas later during life, the hepatocytes and all the cells in the liver are more mature cells and the old cells as a body. And that means that we have different cells that and different level of differentiation of the cells where really the malignant transformation can occur. And we know very well also that during life, we can accumulate more and more mutations. And if we take the example of pediatric tumors, so we developed recently a work on hepatoblastoma and pediatric liver tumors. We learned a lot from that. Only 4 functional mutations are sufficient to ensure the malignant transformation. Whereas in hepatocellular carcinoma, in old patients, for example, we have more than 40 to 60 different genes that are functionally altered in the same tumor. So it's a very complex process and much more mutations that are accumulated during life. So together today, we are going to explore what are the different mechanisms of liver transformation in malignant tumors across the different steps of the life. So for that, we will start with a very early mechanism of liver carcinogenesis. And during life, we are all submitted to environmental exposure. And when this environmental exposure are at the origin of the accumulation of mutations, we can, when we analyze the tumor at the end, we can have like a recapitulation of the different process by which the mutation have been accumulated in the same hepatocyte that transformed into the tumor. So we can read a book at the end that is really at the time of the development of the cancer. And by reading this book, we can make some archaeology to really identify what are the origin of the mutations that accumulated. And what are the origin of these mutations? In fact, it is closely related to the environmental exposure. And we know that we have different causes of that increase the risk of development of cancer. One of the causes, very usual one, is aging. And aging, we know that the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma increase with age, with a peak at around 60 years old. And this is probably due to a large part to the mutations that are accumulated during age. And when we look at the mutation accumulated in the tumors, we see the mutational signature. That means this type of mutations that are more frequent, C2T mutation, in defined context of bases that are clearly due to aging. That's the same for the signature 5, that is a little bit more complex. So aging is one of the major risk factors of development of hepatocellular carcinoma, and it puts some mark during the development of the tumor and the hepatocyte. Other very specific etiologies are, for example, the exposure to aflatoxin B1. And aflatoxin B1 is due to the ingestion of the food that is contaminated by this Aspergillus flavus moisture that produce some aflatoxin B1 toxic. And when you eat this contaminated food, particularly in the countries that are located in Africa, in sub-Saharan area, or in the east of Asia, also close to the tropics, because it's hot weather with humidity, you have a proliferation of this moisture. And then in the tumor, you see clearly a signature, a mutational signature that is C2A, very specific of the exposure to aflatoxin B1 that we described in one of our first papers. Another exposure to a toxic that is very frequent in China, but also in the east of Europe. But in China, it is the exposure to aristolochic acid that is present in some herbals that are used in traditional medicine, particularly for to treat diabetes or to lose weight. And if you drink this tisane and this medicine based on aristolochic acid herbals, you will develop hepatocellular carcinoma with this very specific also mutational signature T2A that are found, for example, in 80% of the hepatocellular carcinoma developed in Taiwan, because you know that in Taiwan, a lot of traditional medicine are based on aristolochic acid. So once again, a precise exposure can put the mark of this history of exposure into the DNA and into the tumor DNA. A surprise was also to identify in our series of cancer, liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma, this signature 4. And signature 4 is very interesting because it is very well known to be related to tobacco smoking, and in particular to the exposure to aromatic hydrocarbon. And so we found this signature mostly in patients, smokers patients, and this signature increased also with the quantity of tobacco smoking during life before the development of hepatocellular carcinoma. Then we have also identified a mutation signature 16 that is well known to be related to alcohol, and also in our series in alcoholic patients this signature was present, whereas in non-alcoholic it was much more rare. It is the same for signatures that is found, for example, in esophagus cancer. Another signature that is frequently identified in hepatocellular carcinoma is the insertion of viruses, mainly HBV, but also AAV. We will come back to that. And for NASH, we have no specific mutational profile, but we know that it is also a very important risk factor of hepatocellular carcinoma. So just to summarize, what we identify is that we have some process and exposure to risk factors that are really common risk factors. For example, age, tobacco smoking, alcohol intake, that put their mark. And so this is signatures that are identified in most of the cases of hepatocellular carcinoma. Whereas we have also some signatures that are very specific of specific exposure and that are more rare. Aflatoxin B1, aristolochic acid, mismatch repair very rarely, but also HBV and AAV mutational, insertional mutagenesis. Now we know also, as I mentioned at the beginning, that genetic predisposition can modulate the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. So what we know first for the pediatric liver cancer is that for hepatoblastoma, we found some cases that are related to the familial adenomatous polyposis, but it's quite very rare cases with germline mutation of the APC gene that activate the Wnt beta-catenin pathway. There is also some trisomies that are at the origin of very rarely of hepatoblastoma, or other syndromes such as Goladibi syndrome that is due to germline mutation of glypican-3. What we identify more frequently is on liver hepatoblastoma. In 10% of the patients that developed hepatoblastoma, we identify mosaic alteration of the chromosome 11p15 as really a preneoplastic alteration in these patients below the age, very, very young children, below the age of 3 years old. So that means that these abnormalities usually are associated with a rare syndrome that is the Whitman-Beckwith syndrome. But here, in this case, it was not a clinical BWS syndrome. It is only the mosaic that is found into the liver. And I just want to mention that because it's really very important in the modern genetics that we have not only to take into account the genetic alterations that are transmitted generation after generation in the germline lineage, but we have also to take into account what happened in the liver and in the organ. And so in this children with hepatoblastoma, you see that in this example that in the normal liver of this patient, you see in blue some area where you have this alteration of chromosome 11 with an overexpression of EGF2, that is the insulin growth factor type 2. Whereas just adjacent, here you have no alteration of the 11 chromosome, and you have in the hepatocyte the expression of the H19 non-coding gene that is located at the same locus. So just to illustrate that we have some patchy alteration into the non-tumor liver tissue, where we know in the case of hepatoblastoma that the hepatoblastoma are going to develop within exactly this area altered for chromosome 11. So this is really the preneoplastic lesion where the hepatoblastoma and the hepatocytes transform into hepatoblastoma. And if we look now with some more modern techniques that are the spatial transcriptomic, in this example, this is a slide of the non-tumor liver tissue, and the tumor is here, delineated by a capsule. And here in orange, you have the mosaic hepatocyte, and here in yellow, you have the normal hepatocyte. You have and also some vessels and etc. So it's very interesting to see that, in fact, all the liver resemble to a normal liver, but in fact, you have the mosaic distribution of the altered preneoplastic hepatocyte. Let's move to the pediatric hepatocellular carcinomas that are usually in older children, 3 to 18. We have also a large number, very rare, but a large number of different metabolic disease that predispose both to chronic liver disease, but also to cirrhosis in early during life, and then to the development of hepatocellular carcinoma. But in children, we have also hepatitis B infection, particularly in Asia and also in Africa, where the children can develop very early during life hepatocellular carcinoma related to HBV infection. And then we have more classical genetic disease that are also predisposing for hepatocellular carcinoma developed in adult. So in adult, we know only a limited number of genetic disease, mainly predisposing to hepatocellular carcinoma, mainly once again some disease that predispose to metabolic disease, glycogen storage disease in children, but then in adult now, and Wilson disease, hemochromatosis, tyrosinemia, and etc. are classical rare diseases that predispose to HCC. We know also some of the syndromes that predispose to other type of tumors, such as once again APC with familial adenomatous polyposis, but also Li-Fraumeni syndrome with constitutional and germline mutation of TP53 that predispose quite rarely also to HCC, Dicer-1 syndrome, and etc. In other words, currently, when we identify familial cases of hepatocellular carcinoma that are quite rare, sometimes we have in the same family the development of hepatocellular adenoma and hepatocellular carcinoma. We have to investigate with the consent of the patient, if they want, the genetic background and to search for mutations that can be diverse and that can justify the exome sequencing to search for familial predisposition to the development of hepatocellular carcinoma. But in fact, what we know also is that there is a close interaction between the genetic predisposition itself, but usually it is multigenic and polygenic genetic predisposition with the environmental exposure. And this is the conjugation and the cooperation of both events that will promote the development and the accumulation of mutations. Recently, we have focused our studies on to search for genetic predisposition in alcohol-related hepatocellular carcinoma. That means that we constitute a case control and a GWAS analysis by identifying some cases with hepatocellular carcinoma related to alcohol intake compared to control that are patients with most of them cirrhosis that develop chronic liver disease or cirrhosis, also related to alcohol. And we perform a first step to discover the genes that are and the loci over the genome that are related to the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, and we validate in the second step in a validation cohort. So in total, we collected around more than 4,000 cases and control, all in alcoholic patients. Sorry. What we identified is all over the genome in the step of discovery is a peak of association on chromosome 1 here between two genes, Win3A and Win9A, that are two genes that code for ligands and activate, have a role in the modulation and activation of the Win beta-catenin pathway. We also identified two loci previously known to be associated with the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, TMC-CSF2 and PLA3. But we will concentrate on Win9A and Win3A that is a new locus of predisposition. For all the three different genes and loci of predisposition, it was in fact frequent polymorphism, so polymorphism that are identified in the general population. But this polymorphism, for example, for TMC-CSF2, was closely related with the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, both in the discovery cohort of patients, cases and control, but also in the validation cohort of patients, cases and control. And this is a meta-analysis of the 4,000 different cases and control. And you see how impressive the p-value are and the related risk for development of hepatocellular carcinoma. That's the same for Win3A and Win9A, the new loci, and also with PNPLA3, that was at a lower value in the discovery. Also, there is some variation. And for HSD 17b13, that is also a very rare, more rare polymorphism with a lower p-value, but this is due also to the number of cases on control, but that remain to be also validated in our series of patients. If we put together, it was already known also and already validated in other studies. If we put together all these different polymorphisms, we can have from 0 allele at risk to 8 allele at risk. That means homozygous for the 4 loci in some patients. And you see that more allele at risk, whatever the genes, more you increase the risk of developing hepatocellular carcinoma. So we can think at combining the different polymorphisms to refine the risk, the individual risk of patients to develop hepatocellular carcinoma. What is interesting also is that the 3 first polymorphisms that were already identified and validated in other cohort of patients, TMCSF2, PNP-LS3 promote the risk of increase the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. HSD 17b13 protect from the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. But all of them, the 3 first, are also related to the severity of the chronic liver disease, both in alcoholic patients, but also in patients with NASH and metabolic syndrome. Whereas for Wnt3a, Wnt9a, it is a protective role, but there is no impact in the severity of the chronic liver disease due to alcohol. So this is the specificity of this new locus. And another specificity is that the protection role of the Wnt3a, Wnt9a polymorphism is related also to the STAT3 and the inflammation that we identified in the non-tumor liver tissue. That means to the immune cell infiltration that is contributing to the protection due to develop hepatocellular carcinoma. And also it is related to the type of mutations that are accumulated finally in the tumor with a lower number of beta-catenin mutation in these tumors. So now let's move to other step of carcinogenesis, once again an early step. That is the telomerase activation that is necessary to ensure the myelin transformation. So what we know also in the context of environmental exposure, it was a summary, that we have the interaction between the exposure to some environmental factor that can also interact with some other variant and genetic variant, in particular at the loci of GSTM1 and GSTT1 that were very well described more than 30 years ago in Africa, where if you have a genotype that is null for the glutathione S transferase type M or T, you are more prone to develop hepatocellular carcinoma with the exposure of aflatoxin B1 and also together with the infection of HBV. In PNP-LS3, TMCSF2, HSD 17b13, and also with Wnt3a, Wnt9a, you have clearly an interaction between alcohol or alcohol and metabolic syndrome for the 3 first to develop hepatocellular carcinoma. So it's really interesting to have to better understand this interaction between the genetic context and the exposure to risk factors. One of the risk factors that we cannot counteract, because most of the risk factors that predispose to hepatocellular carcinoma, we can fight against. We can drink less alcohol, and etc. We know that. But we cannot suppress aging. And during aging, we know that in the liver, but also in all our cells, we are decreasing the length of the telomere. And the telomeres are these repeated sequences that are found at the extremity of each chromosome. And progressively with age, you have a decrease in the length of the telomere. And the lengths of the telomere are very important to protect because if you decrease too much the length of the telomere, then your cells are going to die by the replicative senescence process. But the control of the length of the telomere are under the complex, enzymatic complex, that is where the major actor is telomerase. And telomerase is not expressed in normal hepatocytes in adults, but it has to be expressed in the malignant transformed hepatocytes to ensure the division. Because in fact, it is well known that the length of the telomere decreases cell division after cell division. But in the mature hepatocytes, we divide in our body hepatocytes only 2 or 3 times per year. It's not like in the intestine. So we don't need to have telomerase. But to ensure the activation of telomerase, we have described, we and others, several mechanisms. The first mechanism that is the most frequent one is mutations that are found in 30 to 60% of the hepatocellular carcinoma that are mutations in the promoter of telomerase, promoter of TERT, that activates the transcription of telomerase. Then we know also that viral insertion can activate also the expression of telomerase. We can have also amplification of the TERT gene, but it's much more rare. And also we can have some translocation and chromosomal translocation where the TERT gene is put under the control of a promoter that is a hepatocytic promoter, very active in hepatocytes. So with Massine Gagari in the lab, we collected and he analyzed a series of more than 1,500 patients in the non-tumor liver tissue. This is a description of the patient. And he measured for each sample of non-tumor liver tissue the length of the telomere in the liver. And what he identified, a close relation between the length of the telomere and the age. And you see the correlation. But he also identified that the length of the telomere adjusted on the age was larger and in female compared to male. In other words, if you see the progressive shortening of the length of the telomere, but if you separate the male in blue from female, you see that females, before, after the age of 20, they are more stable in terms of the length of their telomere compared to male. And it has been also identified in the blood cells, a similar effect of the gender and protection of female. Maybe it can partly explain why females are more prone to develop hepatocellular carcinoma. What we also identify is a progressive and more severe decrease in the length of the telomere according to the severity of the fibrosis, and in F2, F3 compared also to cirrhotic patients. What we also identified is that the length of the telomere were shorter in patients with alcohol consumption and excessive alcohol consumption compared to patients without alcohol consumption, but with other risk factors, adjust on the age for sure, in all the cases. And it was in cirrhotic patients, but also in non-cirrhotic patients. So we had 4 different features associated with decrease of the length of the telomere. And we performed a multivariate analysis, and we showed that age that predisposed to the shortening of the telomere, male gender or females that are protected from the decrease in the length of the telomere, cirrhosis that predisposed to a shortening, and alcohol to the shortening also, were independently related to the shortening of the control of the length of the telomere. So that means that alcohol per se can act to decrease the length of the telomere, whatever the severity of the chronic liver disease, the age, and the gender. So that's important because it was debated. You know that several cancers are also related to alcohol consumption, including also breast cancer, for example. But in the general population, it was disputed to know if alcohol per se was really contributing to the decreasing of the length of the telomere or not. Whereas we showed in the liver tissue, that is a major target of alcohol, that it was really true. So probably it's important also for other type of cancer. What we showed also is that, interestingly, the length of the telomere were shorter in small tumors than in large tumors. Similarly, in tumors developed with long telomere, there were more alpha-fetoprotein in the blood, and it corresponds also to tumors that were poorly differentiated, and also tumors with microvascular invasion and with p53 mutations. You have recognized that, in fact, the tumors that showed long telomere within the tumor cells have all the features of highly proliferating tumors, poorly differentiated tumors with TP53 mutations. And in fact, it was also associated, I mean, the long length of the telomere is associated with a shorter survival, overall survival, or even free survival. And using multivariate analysis, the length of the telomere were also an independent factor of poor survival and poor prognosis, independent of the other factors that are clinical factor or biological factor, usually known to be associated with poor prognosis. So just to summarize this part, we know that we start with life with more young, immature cells that can adapt. In old patients, we have more mature cells. During aging, we have a progressive shortening of the length of the telomere that is in fact slower in females that are protected from the crisis and the replicative senescence of the cells that are really an event that is very important also to accumulate alteration and mutations into the genome. But then we can develop hepatocellular carcinoma that can occur early during life and frequently that are associated with long telomere in the liver, sometimes with a liver progenitor phenotype into the tumor. And these tumors are frequently wild type for telomerase because they have still the expression of telomerase in immature cells. And it corresponds to a subclass of hepatocellular carcinoma associated with poor survival. Whereas the tumors that are developed in older patients are those that are occurring in more mature hepatocytes. They are frequently mutated for beta-catenin and also mutated for TERT promoter and with shorter telomeres into the tumors. The question now we have is we put together all this data because telomerase is a very important limiting process to ensure the malignant transformation, but also the survival of the tumor cells. The question is, can we imagine to have to use telomerase as a target therapy? If we can shut down, and we showed that both in cell lines but also in vivo, if we can silence the expression of telomerase, we can kill the tumor cells. But it is once again a very slow process because then after you need to wait for the duration of the silencing of telomerase. But clearly, the tumor cells in hepatocellular carcinoma and all the cells that we have tested are dependent of the expression of telomerase. So it could be targeted, the origin of or the design of targeted therapies, but pinpointing the expression of telomerase, but probably in association with other therapy. Another mechanism of carcinogenesis is due to the viral integration. And we know in human liver cancer, two viruses that can insert into the genome, into the human genome. On the top of the list, for sure, we have HBV, but we have also AAV virus, that is the adeno-associated viruses. The most important target of the viral insertion is in fact, for example, here for HBV, each triangle is the identification of a unique insertion site in a unique hepatocellular carcinoma. And you see that we identified 25% of the HBV-related HEC with an insertion of the virus into the promoter of telomerase. So once again, telomerase is the oncogene that is activated through the insertion of viruses the most frequently into our series of patients. For AAV, we identified also some insertion of AAV exactly at the same location into the promoter of telomerase that activates the gene. We identified also a hotspot of integration of both AAV in red or HBV in green in the promoter and the first exon intron of cyclin E1, that is a gene very important to control cell proliferation and cell cycle, or in the second intron of cyclin A2, here, once again, for both AAV or HBV. That means that there is some hotspot of integration that are found in 3% of the hepatocellular carcinoma in cyclin E1 or 4% of the hepatocellular carcinoma in cyclin A2. And the insertion within these cyclin genes are going to promote a phenotype into the tumors that are very specific, that we call the cyclin hepatocellular carcinoma, that showed unique rearrangement signature. So it's that are characterized by very frequent deletion and duplication of the genome together with very frequent chromosomal translocation. So in other words, cyclin alteration are going to promote chromosome instability that is due to replicative stress because of the perturbation of the cell cycle activation. Very interestingly, HBV itself can induce chromosome instability. This is the example of the site of HBV here on chromosome 5, and it promotes the gain of telomerase, so 3 copies of telomerase. And on the other side of the HBV genome, it was inserted on chromosome 17 with a deletion of p53. So here, activation of the oncogene with a gain of copy, deletion and inactivation of the tumor suppressor gene with a deletion of the second copy of TP53 due to the same insertion of HBV. And by using some sophisticated sequencing technologies, we showed also that the chromosome rearrangements were in fact very complex at the location of the insertion of the viruses. So we have deciphered and described the very early genetic defect. What about the late genetic alteration? Very early during life, so once again in hepatoblastoma, the pathway that is the most frequently altered in hepatoblastoma is the Wnt beta-catenin pathway, with almost all the tumors, except one, have a mutation in either CTNB1 that code for beta-catenin, or APC, or AXIN1. All these mutations, alterations, are going to activate beta-catenin. The second alteration is the chromosome 11p15 alteration, in mosaic or not in mosaic. In mosaic, remember, in 10% of the cases, but at the end, it is 84% of the hepatoblastomas that are altered at this locus. And then we have a series of genes that are rarely mutated, but that are common with hepatocellular carcinoma, with third promoter mutations that in fact occur in children that are the older children. And we have also some other genes that we know very well in hepatocellular carcinoma in adult, NF2L2, RED1A, but that are very rare in hepatoblastoma or amplification of FGF19, for example. This is interesting because some of these genes can be targeted eventually by therapies. This is a case of RPS6K3 that activate the RAS-MAP kinase pathway, FGF19 that activate also the RAS-MAP kinase pathway, and MDM4 that inactivate functionally the TP53 mutation. But one of the features of the hepatoblastoma in children is that these tumors are very plastic. And there is a lot of heterogeneity. This is an example of one tumor. You see a spatial heterogeneity with some areas that are very well differentiated without immune infiltrate. And here it's another contingent with very active proliferation due to a liver progenitor phenotype of the tumor. Interestingly, in both contingents, we identified the same trunk mutation in beta-catenin, CTNB1, or at the chromosome 11p15, whereas it is only the differentiation, and then we showed that it was very plastic between the contingent, the two contingents. It's not exactly the same in hepatocellular carcinoma developed in adult, because we have the long story of the development of chronic liver disease and cirrhosis. We know that the earliest genetic alteration that is accumulated is a TERT promoter mutation, already found in 6% of the low-grade dysplastic nodule in cirrhosis. It increased to 18% of the high-grade dysplastic nodule in cirrhosis, but it is not sufficient to ensure the malignant transformation of hepatocytes. Whereas in early HCC and more progressed HCC, it's 60 to 80%, 90% of the hepatocellular carcinoma that show an activation of telomerase through TERT promoter mutations or the other mechanism I described previously. But we have also together accumulation of alteration of oncogenes such as beta-catenin or tumor suppressor genes such as TP53, RED1A, RED2, and etc. So it's really the combination of the different genes that are mutated that ensure the malignant transformation and that ensures the genomic diversity. So this is the example of what we identified. It's not really random how you accumulate the mutation to ensure the development of hepatocellular carcinoma in adult. We know more than 160 cancer driver genes. That means genes that are recurrently mutated in hepatocellular carcinoma and that are supposed to have a functional contribution to the development of the tumor. Beta-catenin mutations, CTNB1 mutation, are identified in 20 to 40% of the cases. These mutations are frequently associated with NF2L2 TERT promoter mutation or RED2. Interestingly, the tumors that are mutated for beta-catenin are in fact exclusive from the mutation of AXIN1. So it's different tumors that are mutated for AXIN1 that are in fact frequently associated with RPS6-KS3 or RED1A. So for this exclusivity, it's very well understandable because these two genes belong to the same pathway, the Wnt beta-catenin activation. So probably it's sufficient to activate beta-catenin or to inactivate AXIN1 to ensure the malignant transformation and then the natural history of the development of hepatocellular carcinoma. But interestingly, beta-catenin is also exclusive from P53 mutations that are identified in 20 to 50% of the cases of hepatocellular carcinoma and associated more frequently to KEAP1, CTND1, cyclin D1 gene amplification or FGF19, etc. And we don't understand why. It is not the same pathway between beta-catenin and P53, and we don't know why we have these two different subtypes of tumors that are exclusive from each other. We know that there is some heterogeneity also within the same tumor, and this is a very interesting publication. But we know that this heterogeneity, in fact, is mainly driven by the same mutations that are the cancer driver gene mutation in TP53 in this example, or in the receptor to EGF insulin growth factor type 1 that are found in all the different areas of the tumor, and only a few of the mutations are really private mutations found in the different area, in the specific area. So that's important because, in fact, most of this area were, in fact, generated by the same mutation that are the trunk mutation common to all the part of the tumor. We know also that we can reduce the diversity of the tumor from the 160 different genes that are contributing to at least to the diversity of the hepatocellular carcinoma, to a 6-group classification, transcriptomic classification, that are each group are in fact related to clinical features, genetic alteration, and etc. So this is an example. For example, most of the tumors that belong to the first group, G1, are in fact enriched in female, frequently infected by HBV mutations, frequently showing BAP1 mutation. And this is the example with RPS6K3 mutations. And interestingly, with the analysis by the pathologist, these tumors showed some very specific histological pattern with the fibrolamellar features that are characteristics of the BAP1 subgroup of tumors. Another example is tumors classified in G3 that are associated with very poor prognosis, once again with mutation also of TP53, chromosome instability, but particularly also associated with TSC1, TSC2 mutation, activating the PI3 kinase pathway and the FGF19 amplification. These subtype of tumors are now identified by Julien Calderaro in the lab with a very specific pattern at the histology that he termed macrotrabecular massive pattern of hepatocellular carcinoma that you can recognize to be associated with a poor prognosis of hepatocellular carcinoma, whatever the treatment and the stage of the disease. Another example is in the fourth group that are enriched in the hepatocytic-like hepatocellular carcinoma, frequently also associated with JAK-STAT activation, that means with inflammation and steatohepatic subtype of hepatocellular carcinoma. And the very famous beta-catenin activated tumors that are due to the mutations activating CTNB1 are classified in G5, G6, very well known to be associated with a cholestatic, very well differentiated hepatocellular carcinoma with chromosome stability. And you can recognize also this subtype with, first of all, the cholestasis, and second, with specific staining with overexpression of glutamine synthetase and nuclear beta-catenin. So this is a summary of all the different features that are related and closely related with each subgroup of hepatocellular carcinoma. And you see that it is highly consistent. And for the future, it would be very interesting to identify, for example, these tumors with FGF19 amplification, because we know, for example, that FGF19 amplification can be associated with a poor prognosis, but also could be targeted by the inhibitors of FGFR4, so the receptor 4 to fibroblast growth factor, that ensure, if you select in this paper published in Cancer Discovery, if you select using immunohistochemistry the tumors that are overexpressing FGF19, you see that in the clinical trial, a lot of partial response or complete response, whereas if you compare with the tumors without expression of FGF19, there is no response or almost no significant response following the treatment by the inhibitor to FGFR4. So it's very interesting to decipher in the future clinical trial that can pinpoint some of these mutations or alterations, but that are sometimes very rare and found in, for example, for FGF19 amplification, it is identified in 5% of the early hepatocellular carcinoma. It increased to 10 to 15% of the more advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. So we have to be very personalized. So just to summarize all what I showed you is that there is different liver cancer according to the age of development with different genetic predisposition, germline predisposition with APC germline mutation or HNF1 alpha germline mutation or glycogen storage disease. Mosaicism that are at the alteration of chromosome 11p15 that are specific of hepatoblastoma. It pinpoints different cell of origin. Those that are in children very important are embryonal or fetal origin. Then we have the progenitor subtype of hepatocellular carcinoma also in adult, and the more mature hepatocytic hepatocellular carcinoma. With the premalignant alteration in children with the 11p15 alteration, whereas in adult, it's more the adenoma that are mutated for beta-catenin that can be the preneoplastic lesion more at risk of malignant transformation through the driver accumulation of mutations. Whereas we have a lot of different genes that are accumulated in terms of oncogenic or tumor suppressor gene alteration, and that are some of them are similar at the different age of onset of the liver cancer. Some of them are more frequent. For example, MDM4 amplification are more frequent in children than in adults. But it's really the combination of all these genes that can ensure the mechanism and the overall mechanism of transformation. But remember that this accumulation of mutations, alterations also, and chromosomal alteration are related also to the environmental exposure. So we can prevent this environmental exposure, except aging. But most of the others can be prevented. The genomic of hepatocellular carcinoma is also very well related to the tumor phenotype. We can translate the molecular classification and the transcriptomic classification in terms of prognostic markers and also identify some new targets for new therapy. And to develop some new therapy, remember also the story of TERT activation that could be really very appealing for the future. And to finish, I want to thank all my collaborators. I have really a wonderful team, a lot of people that are with a lot of energy and very dedicated to the research work. And I want also to highlight that at ILCA, at the International Liver Cancer Association, we have very soon a single topic workshop, very interesting in Paris. But it will be in a hybrid format. You are invited really to register. It's a workshop that is devoted to the risk stratification and the chemo prevention of hepatocellular carcinoma. And also we will have the annual meeting in Madrid. And it will be really great to meet together in person in Madrid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zamarozzi. Very, very excellent presentations. I have to tell you that some of our students will be attending the meeting, the ILCA meeting, both in France and in Spain. So it's going to be a good opportunity for them to speak directly with you about what you had shared with us. So unfortunately, we don't have so much time for discussions, but if there is some questions from the audience.
Yes, I have a question. I'm sure that my question is going to be stupid, but since I'm not an expert, I can still maintain my... do you have any data on the length or telomerase in the cancer stem cells?
So no, we have no data on that. Because as you know, the cancer stem cells are very rare and it's very difficult to isolate them. So we have no data.
because this could be a one way to prove that the hypothesis of the role, the key role of the telomerase is important, and also to address the possibility to treat recurrency, particularly by modulating.
Mhm.
I agree.
So Cecil has some experience. You want to add something, Cecil?
But let's go first to the questions from Dr. Pascott here. Okay.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. I have a couple of questions. First, I know that there are some papers suggesting a sort of feedback between telomerase and beta-catenin in cancers. So I'm curious if you ever investigated the correlation in the expression between those two players in your samples.
Yes, we investigated the relation between the length of the telomere into the normal liver or into the tumors, between the level of overexpression of telomerase and what we identified in terms of the length of the telomere, and we didn't identify a relationship. Even if we corrected for age and other confounding factors. So we have no argument to sustain this hypothesis.
Okay, thank
in
you.
Human.
So much. In human. And I have another question, if I can. It's more general. So in your opinion, how far are we from applying your results to real life? Are you already studying, for example, are you assessing the polymorphism in the patients coming in your hospital? Or?
Yeah. So for the polymorphism, for example, it's really how we can identify some composite biomarkers or markers, in fact, not bio, except to assess better assess the risk of development of hepatocellular carcinoma. So these type of studies are conducted in cohort of cirrhotic patients, so at-risk patients, and it is under investigation by Pierre Naon, for example, or in Servier, Ciral, and etc. We have to know better for that and in large cohort. But what we need is to have cohort of at-risk patients that are followed during 10 years to know exactly which patients are going to develop hepatocellular carcinoma, which not, and then you can apply and test for all the markers that you have and make some composition and integration of all the data. But just to notice that Win3A, Win9A, and also TMC-CSF2 and PNPA3 were also already identified to be associated with the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma in this cohort in alcoholic patients. So that's very interesting because it's a validation and a prospective validation of the role in modulating the risk. But then, for the other polygenic disease, we need a huge number of patients to really decipher and identify the polygenic score.
Thank you so
We
much.
need to collect that in Europe and to put
we are doing it. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Federica?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful presentation, Professor. I was wondering if you would recommend, at least in young patients, in which you have a clear etiology of the hepatocellular carcinoma, a wide next generation sequencing, or at least something which is coming closer to other tumors like the lung or at least cholangiocarcinoma, to try to find out better explanation. I mean, we have at least 30% of the patients that are resected in our hospital which have no fibrosis, or at least mild fibrosis, mild steatosis. So, and for sure, this is not the reason why we are developing hepatocellular carcinoma.
What we are doing currently is that we are sequencing the patients and the tumors for research.
Mm-hmm.
So what is including into research term is retrospective collection of tumors to better understand the mechanism, what we have spoken about today, but also now the samples that are collected within clinical trials to better understand prospectively into the clinical trial which patients are going to respond to those and to compare patients that respond to those that are not resistant, and to identify some factors that could be related to this resistance or response. And then to validate Okay, because if we are just searching like that, we found a lot of confounding also factors, but to identify the real mechanism. That's for research, and we need to do that. I mean, for me, no clinical trial should be designed without a tumor biopsy and without the possibility to retrospectively analyze all the tumors from a clinical trial. This is very important for our community. It has been done, and it is currently done for all the type of tumor, except for the liver tumors, because of the lack of biopsy. And we are very late in this field because we have not the biopsy. We need to change that very fastly. We need to be like in breast cancer, like in colon cancer, like all the other cancer. We should have the sample to analyze the tumors. That's for research. But now in clinical practice today, familial cases, you should investigate with germline mutation. If you want also with the mutation into the tumor, it can help sometimes, but for sure for germline mutation. This is genetic counseling. For the others, we are doing currently in France a program where we include the patients that are relapsing and that are resistant to the treatment into a genomic program that aim to sequence prospectively these patients and to maybe identify some targets that could be used to treat these patients that have no other solution currently. This is in progress. We don't know if it is useful also. It is at the boundary between the practice and the research.
But it's time to start. Yeah. Thank you. I definitely agree.
Welcome. But particularly in young patients, in fact.
Yeah.
We are more prone to propose the sequencing also in young patients, sometimes at the time of diagnosis, because we have the feeling that they will relapse. So we collect the sample, we extract, and then we can send it for very fastly, and we save some time into the process also of having the result of the sequencing.
Thank you.
Okay. Professor Morrissey, I have maybe you can answer also very quickly your opinion, because now we're very in trend with this liquid biopsy, secreting tumor cells. So you don't have to go to the biopsy of the liver, just go with the, let's say, surrogate markers in the circulations. How close those markers, those secreting cells with the reality? Because if you go to the specimen of the liver tissue, you will see a lot of heterogeneity inside. But the one that is released into circulations might be different, but from the source of the tumor itself. So what is your comment on that? Thank you.
My comment is very brief. Liquid biopsy currently is maybe useful for the follow-up of the same patient and to detect early relapse. But to identify really the subtype of hepatocellular carcinoma and to have an idea to guide the therapy, it's too early, because it's not sensitive enough and we have not the full panorama of the mutations. And you have seen that, for example, FGF19 amplification are quite difficult to identify also into the liquid biopsy. And it's much more better to have the tumor biopsy at this moment. Once again, tumor biopsy is mandatory where we are, at the stage where we are for liver cancer. And I have to say that also in breast cancer, they are doing liquid biopsy, but also tumor biopsy. It's not one or the other one.
I completely agree. Thank you. Prof. Trivelli?
Yes, now just a comment. I mean, I like your remark that we are very far behind what they are doing in other type of cancer. So I wonder whether it could be useful, in my opinion, it would be to make a consortium, a European consortium, to address this and then ask for a major grant of the European community to deal with. Because I think that by putting together the expertise of different centers, we can, number one, reach a sufficient number of cases to have an answer. And second, we can really dissect what we are dealing with and actually try to trim our target rather than to shoot in the dark, actually trim our aim. And I think that this could be one major aim of the International Liver Cancer Association to apply for a European grant. And I think that you should think about, and as far as we are concerned, we'll be more happy to take part in this adventure.
I would be more than happy. It's very difficult to stimulate the community on that and to obtain the biopsy, in fact.
Yeah, but we can try.
Yeah, yes, we should do it. I fully agree.
Otherwise, it's really nonsense having a lot of information on cancer colon, cancer, breast, and brain, and everything. And cancer is, and liver cancer is still, I mean, high. I mean,
I agree.
lingering. Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate your talk. Very nice, very exciting.
Thank you.
Merci.
Okay, so I think we already passed the timing. So Professor Zumarrozzi, thank you again for your time today and then share your excellent overview with us. So I hope we will be staying in contact in next days, and then I hope you will be happy again to be invited in the future to talk to us again. And then we will see you very soon. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Have a good
Ciao.
day. Good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bravo.